So on the disassemble for the iPhone 5, we'll get to the actual disassemble in a minute. We'll cover the tools that you'll need first for all the repairs. You may not need all of these, but we'll cover them anyways. So first is a Phillips head size 1.5 screwdriver. We have a pentalobe screwdriver, and this is to remove the two screws at the bottom of the phone to take the LCD digitizer assembly out. Then I use two flathead screwdrivers, size 2. One has a finer tip, and you notice that the bottom one has a finer tip than the top one, and that's to get in kind of tight places to either lift cables or plugs. You can use one, but I have two. And then same, I also have two tweezers, and one is magnetic, the other one's non-magnetic, and it just helps sometimes to either be able to lift screws out or to not lift screws out. So that's why I have one of each. And then we have a couple of guitar picks, and with these it helps during the disassemble for the LCD digitizer assembly, and then it also helps with the battery to use these to take it out. The other thing we use is a suction cup, and I buy this from a craft store. Now these are better than most of the ones you can get online, and it's just a larger surface area, so you can lift the screen out easier. And then for a couple of the contacts, I'll use an eraser. Sometimes you can fix the issues you may be having just by cleaning the contacts between certain contact points, and so that's handy sometimes. And then of course you have your SIM ejection tool. You can also use maybe a thin paper clip to get in and lift the tray out. Then I also have a kind of a pointer. I'll just use this to point things out. Sometimes it does help to get in and be able to, again, lift plugs or cables, but most of the time you use the tweezers for that. And then we also have our toothbrush and rubbing alcohol for the liquid damage repairs, and use this to clean certain parts of the board or plugs. If you get into kind of a heavier liquid damage cleaning, then we also use an ultrasonic cleaner. But for more details on those repairs, you can watch the water damage videos at the end of the chapters. Now that's pretty much all the tools. So with the phone, the first thing you'll want to do is power it off. So you'll power it down, and then the second thing, and we've already done it, is you'll want to remove the SIM tray and SIM card. So you'll want to remove that, and then once the phone's powered down, we can actually get into taking it apart. So you have these two screws down here at the bottom, and we'll use the pentalobe screwdriver to remove these. Now with everything, as you're taking these phones apart, you want to make sure that you keep everything in order, because it's really easy to mix screws up or put something before something else, and then when you go to put it all back together, it's you're not sure what goes where. So just remember, as you're taking it apart, that you keep everything kind of in order. So once we get those out, what we'll do is we'll use our suction cup. Just make sure you get a nice firm kind of seal on there, and then you can either just kind of pull down and backwards, and you'll notice that at the top, kind of up here, you'll get some separation. So if you get a good enough seal, you'll be able to pull the frame off. If you can't pull it back, what you can do, and kind of is a little easier, but you can kind of pull the suction cup down, and then get your guitar pick kind of in the corner, and you get it in there enough, it should pop the frame for the assembly, and you can get the pick kind of right down in there, and then just slowly work it around the edge. So you want to start just a little bit of separation, and then once you get that separation, you can take the suction cup off and then just kind of work your way down, being careful not to push too hard. But these little clips on the side, you'll actually use that to remove these little clips from the frame. So that's kind of what's holding it in place. And then once we get it up, there'll be a bracket right here with 3 screws holding the bracket over the digitizer, LCD, and speaker plugs. And we'll go into a little close-up right here to show you those three screws. So we'll remove those 3 screws, and then we'll actually lift this retaining bracket, and it's held on with 3 little clips right on the inside right here. So once we get the screws out, we'll lift from the right side, or the side closest to the frame, and then we'll be able to remove those clips from inside there. So we'll go back and I'll show you that. Now you want to kind of, as you're holding the frame, you also want to support the LCD assembly. You don't want to put any strain or stress on these cables, because if you tweak them or move them too much, then you can actually tear them. So you kind of want to just keep it all together at first. And again, make sure you keep everything in order. And then what may be easier is, if you find it easier to maybe hold it like this, whatever. But as long as you're supporting the assembly, then you should be okay. But whichever way you hold it, you want to make sure that you keep everything in order. And then you'll notice that retaining bracket kind of lifts up on its own. So once you get that, you can lift it towards the battery, and then these little plugs, these little clips on side, lift right out. Okay, and then we have these 3 cables right here that you want to be careful. It doesn't take much to unplug them. You lift that one, then we have this one, and then one more underneath, and that's that one right there. Then once you lift that off, you should be able to remove the LCD. Okay, now here's the board. The first thing we'll actually want to do before we remove any other screws is we'll take these 2 little brackets off down here and unplug the battery. If the phone happens to come on, you don't want to be taking screws out with the phone on, so you just safeguard against that by removing the battery. So we'll there's 3 screws right here and then 2 brackets, and so we'll just remove these first. And then you also want to know and keep a track of which bracket goes where. This bracket on top actually goes underneath the bracket on the bottom. So when you go to put it back together, you just want to remember that. Okay, and then you can get kind of right down here in the corner and just gently lift up this battery plug. Now once that's done, now we can kind of go into all the other screws that are holding the board in place, and I'll show you again on the close-up. So we have the 2 screws at the top you see right there. Those actually hold down the antenna switch, and those are mounted to the frame. So we'll take those 2 out directly in the middle of the frame right there. And then we have, I'll point these out, we have 2 more screws right here, one there and one there, and those are holding this bracket down for the flash. Then we have a screw right here in the corner. We have a screw underneath these feed lines, and we have another one right there, another one right there, and one more right there. So we'll remove those, and then we'll remove the corresponding plugs that go with them. And it's best to kind of get a kind of a routine, either if you start from the top and go down, or from the bottom and go up. But you want to make sure that you start and kind of keep track of which way you go, because if you if you start jumping around, and then it's kind of easy to lose track of maybe where you're supposed to be, and you can forget a screw, or overlook something, and then you can actually tear a cable, or maybe even damage the board. So once we get those 4 screws out there, now we'll use the flathead and actually remove this screw right here. And again, it's just a couple of turns. And this is where it kind of helps to have a more fine screwdriver, as you can actually get the slot into the groove of the screw. Okay, so once we remove that, now we're going to have the volume and power cable right here. And again, I'll show you that on the close-up. We'll have the volume and power cable right at the top, right here, and then we have a plug for this feed line and a plug for that feed line. Now we'll lift those 2 feed lines up and slide them over the battery, so then we're able to actually remove this screw, because the screw is directly under those feed lines. So we need to get those out of the way to get to that screw. So that's what we'll do next. And again, it doesn't take much to actually lift these plugs, these cables off the plugs. Especially these 2 feed lines, you don't want to lift too hard, or you can actually take the plug with the cable. So now once you get those up, we can kind of lift that service tape back, and then just gently, there's adhesive underneath these feed lines that are kind of hold them down. So if you just gently lift those up, you should remove that, and then you can just kind of slide it to the side, and you can hold it, and once you hold it, you should be able to expose that screw right there. And then once you get that, you don't need to lift the bottom ones off. Those should stay. And then we have one more screw right here. And then we'll use our flathead for these last 2 screws. And again, it helps to have the kind of a finer screwdriver. Now, 2 more plugs before we actually remove the board. We have the charging plug right here, and then we have the antenna plug right there. And I'll show you those on the close-up as well. So we have that plug and that plug. And again, it doesn't take much. You just need to get in there, just gently lift from the side and lift from the inside right here, and it will be able to remove both of those plugs. And what's a good idea is just to kind of give a little pressure on the board, so if as you lift this, it keeps the board in place. And then once you get that up, you can just kind of lift it back. There's adhesive holding it onto the board right there. And then again, I'll flip this around and I'll lift right there in that corner. And then just give these cables a half a bend back. And now we should be ready to lift the board out. So the best place I find is probably down here in the corner, and you can just kind of gently lift it. It'll lift it up, and then you can just grab it and make sure it's kind of free of all the other cables and stuff. Now there's one last thing, and it's kind of a hidden piece, but when you flip it over, you'll have this Wi-Fi plug right here, and I'll show you again on the close-up here. But that little cable right there is kind of a hidden cable, and you want to make sure that you don't just yank the board out, because if you do, you'll take that with it. So again, with the flathead or your tweezers, just gently lift that plug up, and it should lift right off of the connector. And there we go. And that's how you remove the board in the iPhone 5.